And I think the reason that he's still in this space is because he is truly committed to making a difference for HR people. So I don't think there's anyone else who understands metrics more than him, and I'm honored to have him as our opening keynote to talk about some trends in the space. Dr. Jack.
I'm a great fan of technology, and I'm probably going to drop this a couple of times. And I want to congratulate Deb on her investment in technology. I see the projector sitting on a cardboard box here. So it gives me a little bit of pause, but hopefully nobody will kick it off. When Deb asked me to come and talk about this, she said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I always like to have some perspective. So let's spend just a little bit of time on what this is all about. Then we'll talk about the survey results, and then we'll talk a little bit about, I think, where things are going, should go, or may go. So those are the three general topics I'm going to take on today, and hopefully they'll have some meaning for you. So with that, technology actually does work, and I'm really thrilled. I have to tell you that 2 days ago I was on a golf course in southern Portugal, and I had forgotten that I was supposed to be here 2 days later, so there's an example of very bad planning. If I had thought ahead a little bit, I would have not had to get on an airplane and fly over here at the last minute to do this, but I'm glad to be here. But it's just a good example of someone who didn't plan very well ahead and didn't use very much intelligence. So I'm not sure that I'm a good expert at this, but we're going to take a pass at it anyway. So here's where we go. Workforce intelligence, I think this is what we're really about. I'm more interested in the business, the organization in which you reside, than I am in the HR department or workforce planning program. Those are things that we do, functions we provide in order to help our organizations be more effective, to be profitable, or if you're not a profit organization, to serve the mission or charter of that institution. So it's not that I don't care about HR, because I do, because I'm one of them, and so are you. But I'm more concerned about the effect on the business than what goes on within our function. So if you'll allow me that, these are the types of applications that I see around organization planning and development. We have to start with clearly with operating data, for HR data and business data. Then we go to benchmarking, and over time we have evolved it from benchmarking into descriptive analytics, which tell us what happened, and that's mostly what we report these days. We report on something that happened last week, last month, last year, how many people we hired, how many people we trained, how many people of this, how much of that, all about the past. It's all descriptive analytics. It tells us what we did, and if we look into it, how well we did it. Were we efficient or not? Was our productivity high? Was our quality high? Was our service high? All about the past, and we need to know that kind of stuff because we want to continually improve our operation. But we need now to segue in where the market now is, as I see it, it's moving towards predictive analytics, and that's the latest book that I wrote that Deb mentioned, because that tells us what can happen if we do this or do that. Based on the tools that are available in technology today, in statistics and accounting, we can put these things together in some really fine packages which help business make better decisions about resource allocation for the future. Because the future is all we can manage. We can't manage what happened yesterday. We can only learn from it. And we also cannot extrapolate from yesterday to tomorrow. I think all of us are a victim of that situation right now. If you go back to 2007, I was in Vienna giving a talk when the whole thing came down, starting out there in Iceland, in through England, across Germany. The whole world collapsed economically in a space of about 2 months. And what it's done to us is it's changed the world. It's changed the marketplace for us as people who operate in businesses and try to make things better. Because what we cannot do is take what was going on in 2006 and 2007 and say that's probably what's going to happen in 2011, 12, or 13, because there's two different worlds now. So having data from the past is good about learning the past and improving efficiency perhaps, but it's not good about predicting for the future, and that's the only thing we can manage. And the last piece that we haven't really come to yet, but is very important, is what we call data integration, which looks at the interdependencies of data from the various functions. It's not only human capital data, but it's the structural capital data that comes out of other functions in the organization, such as sales and marketing, production, finance, IT, etc. We can't have these things spread out, all operating independently any longer, because it doesn't work that way. The market demands we have to move more quickly, with much more intelligence, and therefore we have to bring that together, and I'll show you how to do that towards the end of this. So that's a starting point as I see it. And here's a little bit of history. From about 1950, just after the end of World War II, until about 1990, planning grew slowly and gradually, and most large companies were doing some degree of strategic workforce planning. They were beginning to use some fairly sophisticated techniques in the 70s and 80s, like operations research. This is very heavy-duty statistics. So things were moving along very nicely until about 1989, 1990, when all of a sudden we had a major shutdown in this country, like we have today, a big recession, massive layoffs. About 3 million people lost their jobs between 1989 and 1992. And at that point in time, nobody was interested in planning. If you talked about planning, they say, I can't plan, I'm busy firing people. And we had a brief respite then from about 94, 95 up until .com, and then all of a sudden that craziness started, and people said, I don't have time to do planning because this nutsy stuff is happening now. I don't know if that's a technical term or not. Crazy stuff is happening right now. So let's worry about planning some other day. Well, in 2 years, .com went down the tank, down the tubes, and it was another couple of years before we took a deep breath, settled down, took a look at the market, what's going on, and realized that we do have to do some planning. So that's a brief history. So what's happened now is we've got a slow and I think steady increase in planning based on some of the data that came out of this survey and other research I've seen. So that's the good news. We're into a new phase now, and planning is beginning to take effect. Now, why is this coming about is the question. Why all of a sudden is there a resurgence in planning? I think it's the things that we've always talked about in the last year or so. The market certainly is uncertain. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Who knows what kind of skills are going to be required and what the competition is going to be for them. So we can't just sit back and wait for something to happen. We have to make some kind of steps forward to deal with the uncertainty in which we're living today and which is likely to carry on for at least a couple more years. Then technology has come along and made some great advances, both in terms of processing capability and along with statistics, to enable us to do some very heavy-duty analysis. So with the support of technology, we're now capable of doing lots of things that were not possible 10 years ago. And then finally, labor. We've got shifting demographics, and we've got work-life balance issues. The workforce clearly is different than it was 10 years ago. Everybody knows that. But it's all part of it. So market technology and labor demographics are forcing us to get into workforce planning to some degree or another. And any organization of any size that doesn't do workforce planning is, I think, absolutely doomed to be a follower and not a leader. I don't see how you can possibly be a leader if you don't have some kind of a workforce plan that ties into the business. So let's take a look at the data that came out of this survey now. There were approximately 400 people who responded to this survey. And I know that you can't read these numbers, so I'm going to read them for you. The first question, or one of the questions, was about the level of adoption of workforce planning. And the first line says that people said, we're still trying to get management buy-in. 49, basically half the people, 49% of the respondents said they're still trying to get buy-in, which means they're not doing anything yet, but they want to do it. The second line, early adopters in the process, but still in a discovery state. So again, very early on, 38, almost 39% of the people responded that way. We've chosen a methodology and a provider, but we're still in a discovery stage, another 7 to 8%. So if you take those three right there, let's see if I got this in here. Oops, backwards. Well, now we're in trouble. I told you I love technology, except when I have to do it. Somebody better come and tell me how to get out of this. Well, Dan, you have a better finger than I do because it's not working. Thank you. See, that's what happens when you're born in another century. Okay, so basically we've got about 95% of the population that's really not into it very far. We've only got heavily involved but still need help, 1.3%, that's almost nobody. And advanced users of workforce planning, somebody really out there on the leading edge, 2%. Now this pretty much follows any distribution of any population. You only have anywhere from 2 to 10% of a population being the leaders. And then you have the early adopters who come after that, another 15, 20%, depending upon the technology you're talking about. And then you have the unwashed masses who are just out there and who will probably someday, to some degree, maybe do something. So it really is run by the top 10 to 15% of the people, and you represent that because you're here. That's the good news. So you're the leaders in this field right now, and I hope you feel good about it. Okay, next question was asked is the practices in terms of using consulting firms. And you can see 2/3 did not use any kind of third-party support on this, and 1/3 did use it. And then we'll take a look at what did that mean when those people used it. So there were about 30 different third-party users that were mentioned, which you'll see in a second. But there were only 3 that had multiple cases that were reviewable. And these are the 3, and you'll see them in a minute. They're just A, B, and C now. In terms of the investment, if you look at average annual investment, Company A, 71% of their customers were spending less than $10,000. So obviously they're not doing very much, right? Unless the prices are really low, and we know they're not. So we don't have very many people in that group doing much. They've got another 27% are spending between 10 and 100,000. So maybe they're starting to get serious now and to do something. And then you can follow companies B and C. 50% not spending any more than 10,000, 1/3 spending between 10 and 100, and 16% spending over 100, as much as 500,000. And again, you can see on C, a little bit different, 3/4 of the people spending less than $10,000 on this process. So if we look at this overall, we can say that there's not a whole lot happening in workforce planning, but there are some serious starts in a few places. So we'll see what we can learn from and about those. So there's the break right there. Only a very small percentage of the population is spending over $100,000 on their systems to date. Okay. So here are the consulting firms that were reviewed that had more than one review, which we could really look at. So I looked at these 3 in depth because the rest of these, there simply is not enough data from one data point to make any kind of conclusions or to make any kind of statement. So Accenture, ADP, and Aon Hewitt are the 3 that I looked at to some degree. Okay? And this is what came out when they were asked when the respondents were asked questions about how they felt about the service they were getting from these 3 different sources. So again, I'll read these for you. And the numbers down here represent the 3 companies above. Okay? So the first question is, what is your overall satisfaction with products and ability to meet the needs? This is on a scale of 10. Okay? So you can see Aon Hewitt is 6.6, Accenture is 6.0, and ADP is 6.4. Now, I hasten to add, don't draw any great conclusions from this. Don't run out and hire one of these based on the data that you see, and certainly don't fire one based on the data that you see. Small population, obviously, limited number of cases, And so while the data is interesting, it certainly is not conclusive. So it's just a starting point. Okay, second is overall ease of product use for end users. Okay, the people actually have to use it, 6.6, 6.2, and 5.9. And if you've looked ahead, which I'm sure you have, you can see all the numbers are right in here between the high fives and the mid sixes. So overall, the level of satisfaction is in that general range, 6%, give or take a little bit one way or another. The next one is overall ease of product use for HR professionals. And again, you see 6.7, 6.3, 5.8. Okay? What does this mean to you when you look at that? Think about it. What kind of conclusion can you draw from this? One is that there's not a whole lot of difference, is there, between the three providers? Given the state of the art today, I wouldn't expect there to be a whole lot of difference. We would think maybe further on, a couple of years from now, somebody would jump out and be a real leader. But there's no clear leader here. They're all providers at roughly the same level of performance and satisfaction. Okay. So we're at a starting point. Overall ability to deliver what was contractually negotiated, all right around 6 on a scale of 10, 60%. Overall perceived return on investment in this product, does it bring a lot of value to your organization, was the sub-question. Again, 5.9, 5.8, 5.6. Okay. It's beginning to sound like the Olympics, isn't it? An overall impression of support and service offered by the supplier, 5.8, 5.7, 5.7. Virtually no difference. Virtually no difference. So that gives you a general feel for the three third-party organizations that did most of the providing for people who responded to this survey. So again, right around 6% level of satisfaction. Not surprising. And I think there's an underlying issue here also that may not be evident. But when you have very few people who are doing very much, as we saw earlier, okay, the people who are just starting to get into this, the 4% who are doing something at all, and the number just above that, well, I think was 16%. I'm not sure they know the right questions to ask. I'm not sure that they are a good customer, if you will. They need, clearly, I think, an awful lot of guidance because they're stepping into this cold water. They don't quite know what to do, and therefore their level of satisfaction is really suspect at this point. So there's two sides of this. It isn't just the support, it's the people on the other side that need to learn more about what they're doing. Okay, this is the continuation of 3 more questions. Ease of implementation to integrate to third-party systems, all pretty much about the same between 5.5 and 5.8. Ability to keep on top of industry trends and improve products, again, about exactly the same. And would you recommend this supplier to your peers? 5.9, 5.7, 5.6. So I wouldn't say that there's anything really conclusive here. I think it's indicative of some early trends in this field, but probably not anything that you can hang your hat on yet. So don't want to dismiss it because you have to start someplace. And this is probably the most, the biggest sample we have so far of any kind of survey of the use of workforce planning or the development of workforce planning. So don't want to put it down at all, but we need to position it in terms of its actual value. So workforce planning is at an early stage. There's no question about that. Deb mentioned it. Others have this morning as well. The data is indicative of what's going on, but it's certainly not conclusive because the sample size is very small here. And the respondent experience is limited, which is what I just mentioned a minute ago. We don't know what we don't know about workforce planning in most situations. It's a new thing, and we're trying to learn as we go, so we don't want to overreact to this, and we don't want to put blame on anybody's side. It's a learning experience for everybody. So that's the basic data as I see it based on that survey, okay? Are there any questions about that? Any thoughts, any ideas? Does it stimulate anything in your lunch-soddened brains? I guess not. Okay, we'll go on then. So going forward, what do we need to do? What do we need to think about going forward? Well, as I look at it, there's two sides. There's the HR side and there's the business side. What do the HR users need? I think clearly the state that we're at in terms of relative newness here, and that's infancy. We need guidance, we need support, we need reliable vendors who will work hard with us and make sure that they give us what we need, because we don't even know what we need except in the broadest sense sometimes. Product development, obviously, we're in early stages yet, although there's a lot of really good product out there, but I'm sure there's much more to come in the next few years. And I think we need field research, we need case studies, we need more examples of what people are actually doing so we can learn from them. Because we're going to have to do this together. Somebody can't go off and do it all by themselves and really step out ahead of the group. There are a number of companies who are doing some pretty good things. It was mentioned this morning in this room, Dow and Google, WellPoint, a few others who are really leaders in this area. But it's a pretty small group so far. So, in terms of the business side, we need better data for current decision making. Senior management does not have the human capital data that they need to make better decisions. And there's two parts to that. One is they don't really know what they need in depth, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And two, we don't even know what they need. So we're both groping here, trying to figure out what it is that we need to provide to management, because they may ask for certain information and they're not even sure why they need it. Or they may need a spot of information here, but not a consistent trend. So there's a lot that management doesn't know yet about what kind of data it needs in order to optimize human capital. And that's our job. We've got to begin to teach them the effect of human capital on various aspects of the business. How do our interventions and our services and our planning programs and whatever, how do they support IT or marketing or production or customer service? We've got to draw direct lines of connection between what it is we do around enhancing human capital and what it is management's need, so that they will begin to learn where there are some spaces where they need data that they don't even realize today. Okay? And we'll learn with them and guide them, and I think that's the key right now, is we need better data for current decision making. Secondly, we need predictive data. We need to move from the descriptive to the predictive. That's really where the leaders are moving now. There's a lot of people starting to do predictive work. It's been stimulated by a number of books that came out in the last few years. Super Crunchers, Davenport's book on competitive analytics, or competing through analytics, the Numerati, that book. There's a number of books you ought to really be looking at, because you can learn an awful lot about how to use data for predictive purposes from those books that are out there. And there are more coming all the time. So again, predictability has to be about capability as opposed to competence. Now, what's the difference? If you look in the dictionary, competence is about being able to do something today, being skilled to perform today under current conditions. Capability is about potential, to be able to perform tomorrow. So I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. But I think that's something that most people haven't realized yet. We're still building competency models, 20 years now since we started that. And yet competency is really about today. And by the time you get a competency model together, half of it is out of date, because things are moving so fast. So I would caution you to think before you spend a whole lot of time and money building a competency model, unless you can build a model that's about capability. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Okay. And the last part is data integration. We've got to bring together data from the different functions, and I'll show you what that's all about as well. Okay, so if you're going to do planning, I don't think you started planning, because what are we planning for and about and who? It's about the organization. We have to plan for the organization. So we need to look at two things. We need to look externally, external forces. These are things in the marketplace which are going to affect human, structural, and relational capital. Human capital obviously is employees. Structural capital is all the physical things that an organization owns, from software to buildings to equipment, all the physical things we own. That's structural capital. And relational capital are the people outside the organization that we do business with. Customers, suppliers, vendors, competitors, et cetera, the government, regulators, those are all relational. As things change, we have to deal with these kinds of things here. Now, I've left this line open because this is where you're expert. So you tell me. In your organization, if you were to ask yourself, what's going on in the marketplace that's going to affect the labor supply for us? What's happening out there is going to affect our ability to not only acquire people, not only engage them and develop them and retain them, but to manage them as human beings and as productive resources. What is happening out here? You need to answer that first question. Once you've answered that, the next question that comes up is this. What does that mean in terms of support? Because people don't work in a vacuum, do they? They work in physical spaces. They work with equipment, material, et cetera, et cetera. They work with structural capital. So is the structural capital that we have today right for dealing with human capital changes that are coming on that we can predict? I'll give you a very simple example. 25 years ago, plus or minus, we introduced cubicles. Right? Cubicles were not given to us by God. They haven't been here forever. Okay? They're just something that somebody decided back in the 70s, this would be a good way to organize people physically within a facility. It used to be you had long rows of desks and you had executives in closed offices, and that's the way it was. And now there was some realization that maybe things had to change, so we went to cubicles. So now the question is, given the technology that's available today, given all the electronic gadgetry that we have today, given the internet, given all that stuff that's going on, as well as the nature of the people of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and God knows what, do we need to change our structure, the space in which we work? Should it be different, or are cubicles still the best thing? And I would bet you that 8 or 9 out of 10 companies have never asked this question. So doesn't that sub-optimize if you have the wrong physical facility to put a different kind of labor supply into? And that's what I'm talking about, is connections and dependencies. This stuff doesn't operate by itself. It operates this way and this way and this way. It's all interconnected. And this is what we do when we work with companies. We start asking those questions. What are the external forces that are driving your organization in terms of human structural and relational capital? And then what are the internal forces or factors that are driving that? It's things like vision and culture and brand and capabilities and leadership and on and on and on. And all this stuff interacts because an organization is like that. It's just a big mishmash of all kinds of variables touching and colliding and working with each other. So I think before you can do anything called planning, you've got to know this. Otherwise, how can you plan? Take the simplest example. If you don't really give any consideration to your labor supply, how in the world could you plan for them? And of course it's a stupid question, because you already know that. But it's more than just the labor supply. It's all this other stuff that makes a difference. It is the economy. Is the economy having any effect on you today? Nah, forget it. Okay. Globalization. How about globalization? I was in Colombia several months ago. There's acres and acres and acres of greenhouses producing plants, flowers, and other produce shipping to the United States. So if you're in anything related to those types of goods, you are affected by globalization. You say, yeah, but it doesn't affect me. You know, I got a little flower shop in West Omaha. But wait a minute. The flowers that you get to sell to your customers, some come from overseas, some are grown locally, and they have to compete. So the pricing of your product depends upon what comes out of Colombia as well as what comes out of Lincoln, Nebraska. That's globalization. Everybody's in the market. That's why this stuff's important. You can't ignore it. Okay. And down here, you've got technology over there, and on and on and on. Okay. When you look these up on the system afterwards, you'll be able to see them in detail. All I want to do is get across the idea of interconnection and interdependency right now. Okay? Okay, workforce planning. Notice I've drawn a red line through it. I don't even like the word workforce planning. I think it's an industrial era supply-demand gap analysis exercise. It's something we did 50 years ago. It's not what we should be doing tomorrow. It's not what we should be doing tomorrow. And the reason why is workforce planning is about filling gaps, right? Supply and demand for positions in an organization. And our workforce plan says that at some point in the future, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positions in this department open, which means we've got to fill them. Okay? So we've got a workforce plan to do that, right? We've got a recruiting strategy, all these wonderful technology to make that happen. So let's say that this is July, okay, and we set this plan up based on the business plan, based on attrition, based on all the other factors in December. And we're projecting a workforce plan for July in this department, and we predict 6 vacancies. The only problem is, come along about May, half of this thing's wiped out. They're not there anymore. Those jobs don't exist. So what good is a plan that does that? You see what I'm talking about? It's a fixed plan, and it doesn't work in a flexible world. So what's the solution, you ask? I'm glad you did. You have to go to capability. It's not about positions. It's about capability. The skills, knowledge, attitudes, motivations that we need, which we can position anywhere in the organization as the organization flexes and groans with the marketplace. So as it changes, as this structure changes, if we've got the capabilities lined up for what the organization needs in terms of its ability to perform, not to fill an organization chart, but to perform, we're in good shape. Because this is very flexible. This is not flexible. It's either here or it's not here. It's tangible and it's gone. So we've got to move from this idea to this idea. We've got to start thinking about what are the capabilities we need and will need throughout the next year, 2, 3, as far out as you go. You see the distinction that I'm talking about? So all I'm trying to do is get you to think a little bit differently, because the market is a little bit different than it was. Okay? Okay, what's planning? It's risk management, isn't it? Anytime you draw up a plan, you're taking a risk. There's an old saying that when people plan, the gods laugh. Because nothing ever works out the way you plan it, does it? Not almost anything. Things move too much in the world for us to plan very far ahead. So we have to be careful about planning. We have to understand we're really talking risk management. That there is a risk for the plan that we put out there as to how effective that plan is going to be. What is the probability of our predictions of what we're going to need fit the realities of the marketplace? So the question is, what are our mission critical capabilities? Not jobs, not mission critical jobs, because they go as the market changes, as the organization changes. But capabilities are much more flexible. What are the mission critical capabilities? Think about your organization. What are the key capabilities in your organization today, tomorrow, and the next day? Not job titles. Skills. Think skills. Okay. It's not that we need a system engineer too. It's we need somebody who knows how to program this, that, and that. And there'll be another that coming along. So you see the difference? That's what I'm trying to point out. How strong is our current bench strength in each of these mission-critical capabilities? Again, not positions, but capabilities. How much do we have? How deep is it? Do we only have one person who can program this, or one person who can do that, or are we 2 or 3 deep? How deep are we in our mission-critical jobs? What is the incumbents, or what are the incumbents' growth potential, capability, competence, capability, competence, capability? See the difference? We might be great here now. We're 6 deep in analog programming, but what about digital? What about hospital services 10 years ago, hospital services today? How about banking 10 years ago, banking today? Take any industry. There's been big changes in those industries in the last few years, and will continue to be. So, do our incumbents have good growth potential? How vulnerable are they to being hired away? We know there's competition for key jobs, key capabilities, because people don't hire jobs, do they? They hire capabilities, right? They don't come and say, I want a system engineer too. They say, I want somebody who can do this. Let's go find them. I don't care what they call them in that company. Okay. So how vulnerable are these people to being hired away? They're mission critical for us. What happens when you lose a mission critical person? Obviously, there's lots of bad things that can happen. You can lose customers, you can lose market share, you can lose all kinds of things. And there's research that says when a supervisor leaves the organization and goes outside versus leaves the organization and transfers, when they go outside, they take people with them. Not physically, but when people see a supervisor or a manager leave the organization voluntarily and go to another company, they say to themselves, I wonder why that happened. What's so good out there that's not so good in here? Maybe I ought to think about that myself. So there's all kinds of supportive research about those types of things in terms of hiring. And what would happen, what would be the impact if these aren't filled quickly? What's been the impact of Hewlett-Packard when Mr. Hurd had to leave under very quick circumstances? How long did it take Leo Apotheker to come in and take the job? Has anything happened at HP during that period? I don't know. I hope I'm not embarrassing anybody from HP. I'm just reporting what happened. I don't have an opinion on it. I'm just looking at it analytically. When a CEO leaves and it takes 60 days to find another one, how come? This company has been around 70 years. It's a leading international, global, fantastic company. How come they didn't have somebody ready to replace him when he had to go? And this is not the first time. Remember Carly. Remember the people before that. Every time somebody's left recently from that company, they've had to go find somebody outside. Why is that? Curious question, isn't it? Okay, so those are issues of impact. Okay, here we go, competencies and capabilities. Here are a list of common competencies that we need in all organizations. Skills, technical and interpersonal. Knowledge, technical and behavioral. Motivation, willingness to work. Commitment, belief in the company. Engagement, emotional involvement. Creativity, ability to innovate. Potential ability to grow. Flexibility, ability to deal with change. And leadership, bringing out the best. So those are competencies in your organization today, right? And you put labels on them, but that's basically what you've got in your organization. And the issue is, what about capabilities for tomorrow? How much of this is transferable from here to here? They're the same issues, but this is a different world. That's why we do planning, right? We don't do planning to take this and just replicate it. Although I had a prospect several months ago who was in the retailing business, was going to change the structure of their branch system, and so they needed a new model for branch managers, store managers, right? And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to go look at the branch managers that we have who have been great in the last 10 years on these issues. They've been the leaders. And we're going to take that and we're going to make that the model for the future. You like that? Is that a good idea? Hello? Anybody out there? Is that a good idea or not? How many say it's a great idea? How many say it's not a great idea? Of course, you're very smart, very intuitive. Okay. It's a stupid idea, right? Because who cares how good somebody was in 2000? I want somebody who's going to be good in 2015, which means this, it's going to change. And something's going to drive it, all kinds of things. It says, how will they differ if change comes from technology or regulations or economics or labor demographics or all of the above? How will these things change based on changes in technology, et cetera, et cetera? Those are the kinds of questions we should be asking when we're doing workforce planning. Forget about structure. That's not the issue. Put it in any form you want. Use any kind of paper you want. I don't care. The issue is, does it address this? That's what the key is. Okay? Okay, let's take it down towards the end now. I talked about data integration. This is data integration. It comes in three parts. First is strategic. This is data that the senior people of the organization need to have. A couple of examples. Labor costs. Does your organization know how much it's spending on labor today? The answer is no, you don't. You don't know. There's a company out here, FlexTrack, that tells you you don't know because you don't even know how many contingent workers you got floating around, how many contractors you got floating around out there. That's all labor cost. And most companies have no idea how many contingent workers they have, as well as how much money they're spending on them. So I would think the first thing management ought to know is, what is your true labor cost? Because how can you manage it if you don't know what it is? So that's a strategic level. Productivity, what is revenue per FTE, for example? Okay. Attrition, what's the attrition rate? Okay. How are we losing people? Then let's look at customer data. Attraction, conversion, and spend of customers. Then let's look at operating efficiency, operating margins. These are just a few, but these are strategic level measures that senior management should know, and leading to things like profitability and mission accomplishment, and it should all come together. These affect each other, don't they? If your labor costs go up and your productivity goes down, what happens to customers? Customers go buy something somewhere else because your product is too expensive. That's how it works. That's what it's about. It's not about a bloody HR program. It's about this stuff. And this, people say, how come we don't have a seat at the table? Because we don't address this. That's why. We're talking about HR programs, and who cares? HR programs are expense. Every program is expense. It's an activity that's expense. The question is, what is the value? What effect are we having? These are the harder questions to answer, because that's why we don't do it. Okay. See, Debbie never should have gotten me up here. Okay, how about operating data? Does operating data have anything to do with strategic effects? How about the cost of running your process, whatever the process is, whether you're talking about hiring and paying people or whether you're talking about process costs in production? Does that have an effect on this? I think so. How about cycle times? How long does it take to do something, to hire people, train people, develop people, et cetera, et cetera? Run processes through your organization, whether it's a service or a product process. How long does it take? And what effect does that have on customers? Because if you don't get to market, you don't get to customer. If you take too long to get to market, you don't have market leadership. And if you're not number one or number two in the market, your margins go way down. So this stuff is important, how long it takes us to do this. Service quantity and quality, employment productivity, et cetera, et cetera. These are all operating issues of the organization that affect the strategic issues eventually. And then the third part, which we pretty much ignored up till now, is leading indicators. What about tomorrow? This is yesterday. This is yesterday. This is tomorrow. This is all we can manage right here. Because the way we do this is going to affect this, which is going to affect that. That's the way it works. So when we talk about readiness, we're talking about, in terms of mission critical jobs, what % of them do we have somebody ready to step into tomorrow? If you're a mission critical person and you leave the organization, do we have backup for you tomorrow? If not, we're in trouble. We're going to lose something somewhere, somehow. If we don't, then you weren't mission critical, right? The logic is there. If you were good and you're gone, we get hurt if you're not ready. Okay. Leadership. Leadership and engagement are absolutely inexplicably tied together. Okay. So much of engagement today is about running surveys of employee engagement and getting a score. Oh, our engagement scores now are 88.2%. That's better than 87.4% last year. Congratulations. Who cares? What does that have to do with anything? It's for an employee to say, oh, I'm engaged now. Yeah. In fact, I'm getting married soon. Just kidding. Just checking to see if anybody's awake out there. Engagement. Engagement is not about a score on a survey. Engagement is about improving productivity, quality, service, and innovation in an organization. That's what it's about. That's what we engage people to do, not get a score on a survey. But we know how to do surveys, so that's what we do. And we report it to management, and we expect something good to happen. And it doesn't. Okay? Mission critical retention, leadership and development investment, culture, these are all indicators of the future. There's all kinds of research behind these that says if you are doing this kind of stuff, it positively affects that and it positively affects this. Okay? It's all there. It's a logic chain. It's incontrovertible. It's there. There's plenty of research about it. Okay? So that's data integration. That's taking strategic, operational, and leading indicators, labor, customers, operations, all in one, because they all affect each other. Okay? I think I beat that to death pretty much. So that's it. I love that little arrow thing. Okay, Naomi Bloom. Anybody know Naomi Bloom? Yeah, if you don't, you ought to. Naomi probably knows more about HRIT than anybody does or ever will. She's fantastic. She said this in a radio interview with Bill Kudik last August. We have some really fantastic automation tools. If HR people had started using them several years ago, instead of asking for a seat at the table, they would have owned the table. Absolutely true. She nailed it. You would own the table. You wouldn't walk in like this. You'd walk in like this, because you would have the data to run that bloody organization, not be somebody who only gets asked now and then to do some little side task like run a planning program. Okay. What good is a planning program? That's the question. What good is a planning program? If it doesn't affect strategic, operating, and leading indicators, it's an expense, and you shouldn't do it. So as you do your planning program, think about that, so that when you do get to the point where you've got to present it, you present it from the standpoint of how it's going to affect those types of things, and then you will own the table. That's the message. Okay? So, we've got time for questions, I think. Got any questions, Brian? Where does the what?
Bulk of cost.
Oh, where does most of the cost come from when you put a plan in? Okay, well, cost always comes from people. It's the time of people putting the system together. It's not the software, it's not the paper forms, it's nothing else. It's the labor time of people, the people who are actually doing it, and the people who have to work within the organization to get them involved, to sell them, et cetera, et cetera. It's all labor costs that are the bulk of costs of a planning program.
One other question from online would be a small organization, 200 people. How do they get started with a planning initiative, given their size and they don't have significant resources, dollar people to dedicate to it?
Okay, the question is, in an organization, repeating this for the exterior audience, an organization of about 200 people, how do they get started? Is it worthwhile to do, frankly, when you're that size? Where do you get the resources? This is just my opinion. I think if you got 200 people in the organization, you don't need a program. I think you sit down with a few senior people who know everybody, and you know everybody. First time I ran an HR program corporate-wide, we had like 650 people. I think I knew 649 of them. You don't need a program in something like that. You need to sit down with the people who run this organization, who also know those people, and you need to talk about it. You say, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? Where are our shortcomings? Where are our capabilities, competencies? It's just a discussion. You don't need a big bloody program. I think we over-organize things sometimes, especially in small organizations, and really in big organizations. There's a tremendous amount of time spent on building structure. And structure is expense. Don't forget it. Structure is expense. It's only the outcome that's value. So I would say there's probably, somebody asked me this question just a few days ago. And I said, you probably don't really need one until you got a couple thousand employees. Because at that point, you don't know everybody anymore. When you get to the point where you don't know who's in the Santa Ana office, that's probably when you start to have some kind of a programmatic effect. Okay. Okay, any other questions here? If you don't ask questions, you're in big trouble, because you're going to have dead air for the next 10 minutes. Come on, somebody disagree with me. Come on, I need a little fight. Somebody tell me I'm full of it. Others have, why not you? Yes, sir, in the back. You got to talk loud because I'm old and deaf, okay? Okay. What would I like them to be in 5 years?
For the kind of client, center clients, big, global, clients.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay, the question is, what do I think that the big providers like an Accenture should be doing to position themselves effectively 5 years from now in terms of creating value for the organization? I think, one, and this is not necessarily in order. One is you need to be on the leading edge of technology. However the technology is moving, you should be out there on the leading edge. But I think you really need to spend as much time as possible in organizations with senior and middle-level people trying to understand that organization. Because if you're going to come into my company, if I had a big company, and you're going to try to help me, then you better know what I'm all about. And you know this. I mean, you do it all the time anyway. But I think a lot of energy has to go into just the contact, the relationships, the learning, going both ways that would be of most value to the customer, to the client. So I would say technology and building the relationships, not just being friends, but in-depth knowledge of the organization. And I know that's not always easy because, some people think I'm a consultant too. It's not always easy to do that. People don't always want to just tell you everything you want to know. So you have to work at it a little bit. But I think those are the two issues I would go after, the human and the technological. And Accenture is a good company. Accenture was one of the sponsors of the Predictive Initiative Consortium I ran in 2007 and 8, which produced the predictability model that we use now. So I want to thank you. And pay my invoice, would you? You did pay my invoice. Lehman Brothers didn't pay it. Okay, any other questions? Well, I thank you for sitting and listening. I'll be around the rest of today and probably some of tomorrow, and I'll be glad to talk with you about anything you want to talk about. Thanks a lot. And here comes the boss.